Good afternoon. My name is Bob Norman, and on behalf of the York County Historical Committee, I'd like to welcome you to our presentation this afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, Ms. Deborah Soderholm. She's one of our own. She's a member of the Historical Committee, as well as a teacher, a historian, an interpreter, and a singer, as we shall find out. Deborah has combined her two passions for history and singing to bring the music of the past alive. Her experience as a teacher in public and private schools, a museum educator, and a stage performer in musical theater, cabarets, and opera all contribute to today's program. This is an original living history program, and it highlights the music and events of the suffragist movement. So without further introduction, on with the show, Ms. Deborah Soderholm.
In all your strength arise. Our cause speeds onward in its might. Awake and claim the prize. We're marching on with shout and song. One hope, one aim, one mind. We've crossed the Rubicon at last and burned the bridge behind. We pledge the heart, we join the hand. Resolved on victory, we are a bold, determined band and strike for liberty. Hurrah, hurrah, for equal rights, hurrah. We pledge the heart, we join the hand, resolved on victory. We are a bold, determined band and strike for liberty. We are a bold, determined band and strike for liberty. You men have had a long, long time from Adam down to Taft, but still unequal are the laws, and everywhere there's graft. While vice and shame trails over all, a slimy, deadly curse. Let women try, think you, that they would make bad matters worse. Give them the ballot, brother men, and this you soon will ken, that votes for women in the end means votes for manly men. Hurrah, hurrah, for equal rights, hurrah. We pledge the heart, we join the hand, resolved on victory. We are a bold, determined band and strike for liberty. We are a bold, determined band and strike for liberty. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and present this show that I started working on over 3 years ago. And we were hit by a terrible pandemic, and so I have been so happy to be preparing this for you today. So, what were women doing in 1913 when this song was written to be so passionate about voting? They had been petitioning, fighting, and protesting for over 60 years and held a parade the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration to re-energize the suffrage movement that had been going on for so long. Imagine at the head of that parade a woman dressed in white with a white gown and a cape leading the way towards liberty. Since I'm covering a lot of the suffrage movement, I decided to dress not as one time period, but as liberty herself. We can learn about the suffrage movement through the primary sources of the melodies written at the time. Music played an important role in gatherings, spreading messages, and bringing the cause together. I've been collecting the sheet music from the National Archives in the Library of Congress, and will take you on a journey through the music that no one has heard until probably now. I want to thank the York County Historical Committee for hosting me this month, and for all of you for coming. The suffrage campaign included conferences, meetings, banners, signs, and slogans. At these meetings, songs and music united and inspired women to persist until they were successful. Many songs were written in honor of, inspired by, and dedicated to prominent women, or most concerned with the average American woman who simply wanted to vote. There are two main categories of suffrage music: rally songs and parlor music. Rally songs generally consisted of women's rights lyrics adapted to the melodies of popular songs, and you'll get a chance to sing along with me later. This allowed for communal sing-alongs at rallies and events where people did not need to know how to read music to participate. Parlor music, on the other hand, featured original music as well as original words, and generally was printed in sheet music format for local contests or local chapters of the suffrage movement. The women's suffrage movement was closely tied to the abolitionist and temperance movement. Women were a part of the anti-slavery societies in the 1840s, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who met Lucretia Mott in London at an anti-slavery convention. At that time, women weren't even allowed to speak in public. After that convention, the two women pledged to each other to hold a convention to advocate for the rights of women. It took them 8 years and many letters between them before they put together the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention in upstate New York in 1848. It was organized by 5 women, grandmothers and mothers, over tea and cakes. They put a notice in the paper for the convention to be held at Wesleyan Chapel in a matter of 5 days. They wanted to prepare a declaration of sentiments similar to other reform movement statements and redefine the status of women in society. Stanton was left to draft the document and modeled off the Declaration of Independence and listed 12 resolutions beginning with, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal," and ended with, "Resolve that it is the duty of the women of this country to secure to themselves their sacred right to the elective franchise." Suffrage and franchise refer to the right to vote and comes from the Latin word suffragium. Charlotte Woodward attended the convention as a 19-year-old. She would be the only person at the convention in 1848 to see the 19th Amendment passed, 72 years later. Frederick Douglass was there and spoke. His words, later published in the North Star, said, "There can be no reason in the world for denying to women the elective franchise." His words helped pass the resolutions, which they were unsure would pass. 68 women and 32 men signed the Declaration of Sentiments. Immediately, the press reported negatively and made some signers have second thoughts and remove their names. Women were described as divorced, childless women, and old maids. It made them to look ridiculous all over the country. At a women's rights meeting in Akron, Ohio in 1851, Sojourner Truth attended. She was born into slavery and escaped in 1826 and gained legal freedom in New York a year later. Some in attendance wondered if it would become an abolition affair. Some ministers discussed women's rights and claimed men were more intelligent than women. Another that men were superior because Christ was male. Then Sojourner Truth spoke to the crowd in her famous speech, "Ain't I a woman?" She understood the important link between women's rights and those of enslaved people. Where does Susan B. Anthony come in the mix? She was introduced to Elizabeth Cady Stanton by Amelia Bloomer. They realized they would make a great team. Anthony was raised a Quaker with the understanding that men and women were equal. She was unmarried and a teacher. She was used to speaking in public, but was chastised when she did so at temperance meetings. Stanton gave a speech that women should be allowed to divorce a drunkard and retain custody of her children. Anthony then embraced the central importance of suffrage, Without the right to vote, women could not change unjust laws or initiate political change. The next song, Women's Rights, a right good ballad to illustrating women's rights, and music and poetry rightly written for the Women's Rights Convention. They tried to put the word rights as many times into that subtitle. Appeared a scant 5 years following the first convention. The topic of women's suffrage became popular in music, but not always in a positive way. It's quite open in its opposition to any role that women might play as politicians and leaders.
I think woman's rights. I'll quick, dear friends, to you rehearse my thoughts and hopes as lights. They'll act upon those darkened minds who strive to gain applause by novelty and making claims regardless of the cause. Woman's right a home to have as perfect as can be, but not a right to make a home to every lover free. 'Tis woman's right to rule the house and petty troubles brave, but not the right to rule the head and treat him as her slave. Woman's right to claim respect from men of every grade, but not a right to walk around as master to each trade. 'Tis woman's right as wife to act alone to legislators, but not a right to count the stand and speak as commentators.
Now we're clear on what women's rights were and were not. In November 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. He had pledged to stop the expansion of slavery to the West. The tensions between abolitionists and slaveholders kept growing, which led to secession and the Civil War. Once the fighting began, most of the women who had been active in the suffrage movement suspended that work and focused their energy on the war effort. Stanton believed women would be rewarded with additional rights once the war ended. The Women's Rights Convention was canceled during the war. Hard Times Come Again No More, written by popular music writer Stephen Foster, was likely written because it was inspired by the growing political divisions and rising tensions in the United States at the time. And the issue of slavery was poised to rip the nation apart, which it eventually did during the Civil War.
Let us pause in life's pleasures and count its many tears, while we all sob sorrow with the poor.
During the war, the women formed the Women's Loyal National League, which would work to abolish slavery and preserve the nation. They instead worked to get the 13th Amendment passed. Some thought the group should support the rights of both coloreds and women, but it became focused on the 13th. The women collected 100,000 signatures supporting universal emancipation. By 1865, the Civil War ended, and the 13th Amendment was ratified. We have fought half the battle, yet 17 millions of women are proclaimed a disenfranchised class. And women were asked to wait, because it was the Negro's hour. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was outraged by the 14th Amendment, which introduced the term male into the Constitution. Anthony was disgusted with the wording. But women continued to fight for their cause. The next song, Female Suffrage, was written a little bit after the Civil War. And, well, you decide if it's positive or negative. Many times it's difficult to tell by the title.
Silks and satins, go when and where you please. Make embroidery and tatting, and live quite at your ease. You may go to ball and concert, in gaudy hat and coat. In effect, my charming creatures, do everything but vote. You may go to ball and concert, in gaudy hat and coat. In effect, my charming creatures, do everything but vote. You wish to be our equal, we praise you something more, and proudly look upon you, than angels little lower. We would not have you equal, but superior to us, as something we can idolize, though fashioned out of dust. You may something equal, but superior to us, as something we can idolize, though fashioned out of dust. Mothers, wives, and sisters, I beg you keep your place, and remain what nature made you, the helpmeets of our race. Let no temptation lead you, nor any wily fox, to descend unto the level of the nation's ballot box. Let no temptation lead you, nor any wily fox, to descend unto the level of the nation's ballot box.
What do you think? Thank you. In these songs, you can see the themes of how they believed women didn't need the right to vote. They wanted to keep them on a pedestal and keep them in the domestic sphere. Now, in the West, Wyoming became the first U.S. jurisdiction to grant women the right to vote. The wives of legislators influenced them to pass the bill. It was a different scene around the polls, where drinking and rowdiness and men sold their votes for alcohol. It didn't happen with women nearby. Women's votes couldn't be secured with whiskey and cigars. Stan and Anthony did not support the 15th Amendment, not because it enfranchised black men, but because it did not enfranchise all women, black and white. Congress passed it in 1869. The suffragists wanted at least educated suffrage. Frederick Douglass had something to say about it. He said it was a matter of life and death. When women, because they are women, are hunted down through the cities and dragged from their houses and hung upon lampposts, when their children are torn from their arms and their brains are dashed out upon the pavement, then they will have an urgency to obtain the ballot equal to our own. Is it not true of black women? Yes, Douglass said. It is true of the black woman, not because she is a woman, but because she is black. He went on to say about Stanton that there is no greater name than hers in the matter of women's rights and equal rights. He found refuge in her home, and it wouldn't have mattered if he was blacker than 16 midnights. Due to divides over black men and universal suffrage, the organization split and became the National Woman Suffrage Association. Women must now lead the way to their own salvation, dedicated to opposing the 15th Amendment and promoting a 16th, establishing female suffrage. Lucy Stone formed the American Woman Suffrage Association, who worked to pass voting rights at the state level. The next song to come into the midst of that split was Let Women Vote. And so you'll get a little more sense again of what they felt was the urgency of giving women the right to vote.
Let woman vote, already from afar. Through parting clouds our eyes behold her bright ascending star. No longer will she meekly yield to man's oppressive laws. When God ariseth in his might to vindicate her cause, repeat the strain, let woman vote, already from afar. Through parting clouds our eyes behold her bright ascending star.
Thank you. Victoria Woodhull was a stockbroker on Wall Street, owner and editor of a newspaper, and a candidate for president in 1872. Representative Ben Butler arranged for her to speak before the House Judiciary Committee, the first woman ever to address Congress. The women from the NWSA attended her speech. She pointed out that the 14th Amendment used the word persons like the Constitution did, and argued that women were not excluded by the 15th, and asked Congress to issue a declaratory act to clarify the right of all women to vote under the authority of the 14th. Afterwards, a representative said, "Madam, you are not a citizen." They came back and said, women were not citizens, but members of the state. Woodhull was embraced by the movement, but she was more revolutionary. She promoted free love at the time, which meant equality, sexual freedom, the abolition of prostitution, no more sexual slavery, and control of her own body, and the end of her dependence on man. After her remarks about free love, the NWSA membership dropped, and they joined the American Suffrage Association. Anti-Woodhull backlash led to the formation of anti-suffrage organizations. The committee leadership argued that women belonged as queens of the domestic domain and not equals. Woodhull then formed the Equal Rights Party against the wishes of Stanton. She was nominated at a convention as candidate for president with a platform for female suffrage, 8-hour workday, free education for all, and she nominated Frederick Douglass as her VP without asking him. Her name wasn't even on the ballot, and she was even too young at the age of 34 to run. Amelia Bloomer, now I'm going to talk to you about bloomers and bicycles, okay, and later baseball. Amelia Bloomer published for the Lily, a women's temperance movement newspaper. Bloomer had attended the Seneca Falls Convention but had not signed because she was a reporter. One way to show solidarity with her feminist friends was to wear bloomers, a controversial new fashion, a below-the-knee skirt worn over loosely fitting pants. Amelia Bloomer published an article about the Turkish trousers in the Lily, and then the costume became referred to as bloomers. The style never became mainstream, and people made rude remarks to women who wore them. But someone like Stanton actually found it very comfortable and emancipating. By 1854, most women who wore bloomers gave up their pants, though, to avoid harassment. But pants was a theme of independence. When Stanton gave a speech to the New York legislature, the chairman suggested that they change the law so that the husband may wear the petticoats and the wife the breeches. All right, I'm going to sing this next song called The Coming Woman. As women were making some strides for independence, in other ways, you'll hear some of the themes come up in this song that they decided to write about all the things that women were doing. I will sing of the new woman who through present misses looming and in politics is bound to hold her sway. Pushing forward in life's battle with a deal of roar and rattle, I bet a dollar men will rule the day. While her hub the babe is hushing, politics she'll be discussing, or perhaps he humbly cooks the midday meal. On the road the bloomers flying, never mind the baby crying, oh she's going for an airing on her wheel. Oh, the men will have to hustle, for she's got the will and muscle, and her goal is big enough to keep the floor. And the woman of submission in a humble meek position is no more. There'll be no use protecting, it will cause more indigestion, and the coming woman is no clinging vine. She will seize you by the collar, shake you till for help you holler, and for peace you'll humbly follow in her line. Useless all this savage looking, you will have to do the cooking, and the washing and the mending of the clothes. It will be no use in kicking, or she'll tame you with a licking, and perhaps land a cooler on your nose. Oh, the men will have to hustle, for she's got the will and muscle, and her goal is big enough to keep the floor. And the woman of submission in a humble meek position is no more, is no more. Now, whoever would have thought that bicycles would be the sign of a liberation movement? In 1896, Anthony declared, "Let me tell you what I think of bicycling. I think it has done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world." Sheet music featured countless titles referencing the new woman or the coming woman. And the bicycle will inspire women with more courage, self-respect, and self-reliance, and will make the next generation more vigorous of mind and body. For feeble mothers do not produce great statesmen, scientists, and scholars. So get on that bicycle, girls.
The bicycle girl, when she gets on the road, is bound neck or nothing to go. For she's first on the wheel, and the trolley she votes is quite too awfully slow. Don't you know, is quite too awfully slow. She's the greatest life show, is the bicycle girl, more than Buffalo Bills, I guess. And from what I have seen of swell shows, I should say, she rides on the wheel in full dress, more or less. She rides on the wheel in full dress. Oh, the bicycle girl, oh, the bicycle girl, she's bound neck or nothing to go. For she's fast on the wheel, and in matters of dress, she isn't by any means slow. Oh no, she isn't by any means slow. Oh, the bicycle girl is the latest thing out, just published by Women & Co. Of their notable rights in a very loose form. In short, without covers, you know that's no go. In short, without covers, you know. But the rights of the bicycle girl are all wrongs. She's no more or less than a thief. She has stolen our collars and caps, and she thinks we'll throw her the handkerchief. Yes, she does leave. I'd throw her the handkerchief. Oh, the bicycle girl, oh, the bicycle girl, she's bound neck or nothing to go. For she's fast on the wheel, and in matters of dress, she isn't by any means slow. Oh no, she isn't by any means slow.
Thank you. A lot of these songs seem to be written from the male perspective, right? What effect they will have on them. In 1878, Senator Sargent of California proposed a 16th Amendment. The rights of citizens of the U.S. to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the U.S. or any state on account of sex. It became known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. It was reintroduced every year until 1887 and then defeated. Year after year, the NWSA held its annual convention in D.C. to lobby legislators. By the 1880s, thousands of women had become suffragists, and women could vote in some school board and local elections. But progress was moving at a painfully slow pace. After 20 years of working separately and neither getting anywhere, the younger members of the NWSA and the AWSA wanted to join ranks and work together. At last, in 1890, they joined to be the National American Woman Suffrage Association. Stanton was president, Anthony VP, and Stone was chair of the executive committee. All getting older and tired, they realized they would not live long enough to see nationwide suffrage. Stanton wrote a farewell speech and resigned as leader. Opposition against women's suffrage continued. Many women and men believed having the vote would threaten women's role in society and home. A higher sphere apart from the public required the full measure of duties and responsibilities, and that women were unwilling to bear other and heavier burdens. They argued it would be harmful to children because of increased discord in marriage and increased divorce. For more than 30 years, the antis argued that only an insignificant minority of women wanted to vote, and that women were unfit because they were influenced by pity, passion, and prejudice. At some of these meetings that they continued to have, they would often use, like I mentioned, rally songs. And we're going to get a chance to try out singing some of those to get you all involved. The most famous is the Equal Suffrage song sheet. And they didn't have to print the music, they could just print the lyrics, and everybody knew the tunes. The words were by Eugenia M. Ray Smith, and it was dedicated to Anna Howard Shaw. So, does everybody know Yankee Doodle? Okay, I will start us off, and then you join in as you are comfortable, okay? And imagine these meetings had mostly women, but also men were included. Okay, ready? It happened once in England fair that women's mind got started on thinking suffrage rights her share from her unjustly parted, that laws and taxes she should heed in which she had no say, sir. To her fair thoughts seemed false indeed, she cried, will not obey, sir. Votes for women, keep it up, never mind what party. Votes for women, sure to win, sing it strong and hearty. Good job, good. Great, we'll try out another one. This is called How Can Such Things Be, to the tune of Oh Susanna. Okay, I'll start us off, and if you're comfortable, please come in. How's it start? Oh, wait. Somebody help me out. I lost the tune. Oh, yeah. I came from California where the women folk are free. I'm bound for Pennsylvania, old-fashioned folks to see. Election night, the day I left, and every poll all right. I crossed the line, near lost my breath. Election was a fight. Oh, men voters, how can such things be? In all this free America, only one half can be free. Second verse. I traveled long, I traveled fast, I went by rail and river. Election sites in many a state, they'd make a home man shiver. Some men, they say, too decent are, they will not come to vote. Says, I invite the women out, and then a change you'll note. The chorus. Oh, men voters, how can such things be? In all this free America, only one half can be free. Good job, you guys. By the close of the 19th century, the biggest enemy of suffrage was indifference. There were anti-suffrage groups in eastern and western states, and after 50 years of tireless effort, only 4 states, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Idaho, had full female suffrage. Suffrage entered the doldrums between 1896 and 1910. Not a single state adopted new suffrage legislation. Anthony left the battle to another generation of women. She said, just think, I've been thriving for over 60 years for a little bit of justice, no bigger than that, and yet I must die without obtaining it. It seems so cruel. Music continued to be a popular way to spread a message and bring people together. Music about America's favorite pastime even had a suffrage connection. So many of you know Take Me Out to the Ball Game. It was written in 1908 by Jack Norworth and Albert von Tilzer, but few know the song's feminist history. It was written as an ode to his girlfriend, the progressive and outspoken Trixie Fraganza, a famous vaudeville actress and suffragist. Her life was defined by her impact both on and off the stage. She was a comedic actress, best known for playing larger-than-life characters. But off the stage, she was an influential and prominent suffragist who advocated for women's social and political equality. Okay, let's go to Take Me Out to the Ball Game. So there's verses that most people don't know about a woman named Katie Casey, and this is a reference to Trixie, who's baseball mad and who saw all the games, and she's knowledgeable about a sport in a man's domain. And on the chorus, I would love for you to join in. Katie Casey was baseball mad, had the
to go to see a show, but Miss Kate said no. I'll tell you what you can do. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if we never get back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Katie Casey saw all the games, knew the players by their first names, told the umpire he was wrong all along, good and strong. When the score was just 2-2, Katie Casey knew what to do. Just to cheer up the boys she knew, she made the gang sing this song. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Yay! That's great. All right. Now you know. The more you know. All right. Meanwhile, in England, women were fighting for the same things and had been for about the same time, but they used different tactics. In England, they used civil disobedience. Critics call them suffragettes, a word intended to be disparaging, but women embrace as one of power and rebellion. Harriet Stanton Blatch was daughter of Elizabeth Cady, lived in England for years, and when she returned, she stirred up new interest in the American suffrage movement. Alice Paul was in England in 1907 when she rode her bicycle to see Emmeline and Christabel Pankhurst speak at a town hall meeting in Birmingham, England. The men had come to disrupt the meeting, thought the idea was outrageous. Christabel Pankhurst tried to speak over the chaos of mice being thrown, bugles blaring, men bursting into "God Save the King," and police entering the hall. Emmeline held her ground and waited an hour to be heard. Here's the song "Suffragettes" from England, which is really an anti-song. If women held office and were allowed to vote, say, how would you like it? Wouldn't it get your goat? For the girl you're to marry as soon as you can. Stop being a lady and trying to be a man. Oh, suffragette, sweet suffragette, don't you ever try to vote again. You are only human. The Lord made you a woman. Oh, suffragette, sweet suffragette, don't you ever try to vote again. For never can be a man. All right. Now we're ready for a parade. Alice Paul joined the British suffragettes and met Lucy Burns, then came back to America to finish her PhD. She was asked to serve on the board of the NAWSA.
She led the congressional committee lobbying legislators on Capitol Hill and wanted to organize a parade, a grand procession that would be held on March 3rd, 1913, and she even raised the money on her own. It would be the day before President Wilson's inauguration and the same route as his parade. They used purple, white, and gold, not green like British suffragettes. But women were dressed in colors by profession to create a rainbow. She asked the police superintendent for plenty of police protection. On the day of the parade, up to 8,000 women arrived in the morning to march from all over the country. Alice Paul had assured African American women they could participate, but some Southern women complained. Paul sided with the Negro in any question of racial difference, she said. She couldn't sidestep the issue, so to compromise, she asked them to march in the back together. Ida Wells Barnett wanted to march with the suffragists from Illinois. She was a founding member of the NAACP, a writer and a campaigner against lynching. There was debate back and forth and many hurt feelings. It finally ended up that Ida did march with the Illinois women in front, marching between two white women. Inez Milholland was the head of the procession, dressed in the white gown and cloak on a white horse like a modern-day Joan of Arc. There were floats, horses, chariots, and marching bands. The crowds pressed in toward the marchers, and the women had to narrow their ranks to single file. Male spectators yelled at the women. The police didn't help, but 400 Boy Scouts then came, and the National Guard and U.S. cavalry troops. The next day was the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson and his presidential inauguration parade, but more press was going towards the Women's March. Now, one of the most famous and well-known songs is March of the Women by Ethel Smith, written in 1911 in England, but it came overseas and was used by the American suffragists. Later, when Smith was imprisoned in Holloway for her suffrage activities, it was reported that she heard her song being sung by prisoners in the courtyard. She then moved her cot to her window, stood on it, and conducted her song through the bars with a toothbrush. This is March of the Women by Ethel Smith.
Shout, shout, up with your song, cry with the wind, for the dawn is breaking. March, march, swing you along, wide blows our banner and hope is waking. Song with its story, dreams with their glory, lo they call, and glad is the word. Forward, mark how it says, thunder of freedom, the voice of the Lord. Life, strife, these two are one. Not can ye win, but by faith and daring. On, that ye have done, but for the work of today preparing. Firm in reliance, laugh the defiance, laugh in hope, for sure is the end. March, march, man he has won, shoulder to shoulder and friend to friend.
This parade had reinvigorated the suffrage movement, and Paul would work tirelessly on Woodrow Wilson and getting his support. The movement then split in 1914, and the NAWSA was run by Carrie Chapman Catt, and a smaller, more radical congressional union was led by Alice Paul. Their efforts went full force because they believed the suffrage must be ours.
The hands that rock the cradle rule the world, 'tis truly said. The hands that rock the cradle oft provide the daily bread. Proud man with frail woman have the task of doing both. Yet strange to say he does not want the girls to have a vote. Yet strange to say he does not want the girls to have a vote. But the suffrage must be ours. Vote we will, yes, vote we must. And we'll march with yellow flowers till we win our cause so just. In home, school, house, and office long we've stayed without a vote. But men must now take notice on the ballot how we dote. From business, farm, and storeroom we are coming millions strong to speak, to march, and boom the votes for women right and strong. To speak, to march, and boom the votes for women right and strong. For the suffrage must be ours. Vote we will, yes, vote we must. And we'll march with yellow flowers till we win our cause so just.
Thank you. And yellow flowers became the symbol of the suffragists, jonquils or sunflowers or tulips, as a symbol of brightness and hope. Combine that with the colors of white for purity and purple for the royalty that every woman is a queen. In 1914, the world changed forever. The Great War started, and though the U.S. was not immediately involved, the pressure was on Wilson. Inez Milholland continued her work as an active suffragist, giving speeches across the country, and her schedule was very hectic and demanding. And she was not looking good, and she was falling ill, and she wrote to Alice Paul that she couldn't keep up the schedule. And so Alice Paul was concerned. One night in Los Angeles, Inez got very sick and passed out on stage. Her last words in her speech were, "How long, Mr. President, must women wait for liberty?" 2 weeks later, she succumbed to her illness, which was anemia, and she died at the age of 30. At the funeral of Inez, it was held in the Capitol Building's Statuary Hall. It was transformed into a suffrage cathedral. Thousands of guests assembled silently as the organ played Ave Maria, and then a boys' choir appeared in the doorway singing, "Forward out of darkness, leave behind the night. Forward out of error, forward into light." Lucy Burns held a sign with Julia Ward Howe's Battle Hymn of the Republic. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. The choir sang, "Thou whose almighty word." After the last song, the audience didn't move. The anthem, La Marseillaise, came from the organ. Paul had elevated Inez from suffragist to martyr. At a protest on Wilson's second inauguration with a parade of suffragists, then a gathering in front of the National Theater and a fundraiser, Paul collected $9,000 from the audience. Ava Belmont pledged $15,000. The event ended with Vida Milholland, sister to Inez, singing the Women's Marseillaise, which had been sung throughout this time period and became a bit of an anthem itself to the French national anthem. So here's La Marseillaise.
Arise, ye daughters of a land that vaunts its liberty. May restless rulers understand that women must be free, that women will be free. Hark, hark, the trumpets calling, who'd be a laggard in the fight with victory
of a push. Alice Paul organized women to be silent sentinels in front of the White House and were instructed to hold banners and not to speak, but they wanted Wilson's attention. If young men were willing to die for liberty on the other side of the ocean, the least Americans could do was grant all of their citizens suffrage. So all of the things that were happening simultaneously is there's the World War I and the women's protests as all of these things are happening. But the support for the protesting was diminishing at this time as people felt the focus should be on the war efforts. After 6 months of protests, the silent sentinels got arrested and sent to jail for the charge of obstructing traffic in violation of police regulations. They arrived and settled in their first floor cells. For a brief time, they were in a common area which had an organ. One friend of Paul's sat down to play, "God be with you till we meet again," while colleagues and 40 others, including mostly colored women, sang along. They sang a few more songs and ended with a Votes for Women chant. After 3 days, the women walked out of prison and celebrated with the suffragists who had gathered to celebrate. But the pickets would continue. When Paul went to Old District Jail, a group of suffragists sneaked up to the facility and gathered outside the window. Vida Milhelen sang the song Marseillaise to them again, while the other women did a roll call for the inmates to hear. They shared the news that more donations were coming, and women had committed to protesting the next day over the imprisonment. Paul and Winslow were encouraged by their support, and they had what they needed to muster a hunger strike, which they did. They ended up being force-fed, and reports of them being very ill reached the news. And Wilson became very nervous, and he had them released. In 1917, the U.S. joined the Great War, and the doughboys were sent out ready to fight and re-energize the war. So you guys know this one? If you know it, sing along.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, go today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to pine, to be prouder boys in line. Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there. Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Johnny, show the Hun you're a son of a gun. Hoist the flag and let her fly, like true heroes do or die. Pack your little kit, show your grit, do your bit. Soldiers to the ranks, from the towns and the tanks. Make your mother proud of you, and to liberty be true. Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there. Good job.
The House finally voted on the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, and it came out 274 yeas to 136 nays, exactly 2/3 margin to pass the amendment. At the bang of a gavel, Women wept with joy and spilled into the halls singing, "Glory, glory, hallelujah," and praise God from whom all blessings flow. They had been protesting for 1 year at the White House. They then needed the Senate vote in the spring. The troop count in Europe had grown to 1 million American men. Wilson spoke to the Senate. They voted, but it didn't pass until September. In Europe, the war of attrition raged on. The same day that the Senate took up the last suffrage vote, Pershing launched the largest military offensive. The battle was horrific. It became the deadliest conflict over 47 days. On November 9th, the Kaiser fled to the Netherlands and abdicated his throne. 2 days later, the Germans signed an armistice and called for the war to end at the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. People flooded the streets of New York, Paris, and London to celebrate. In total, 18 million lives were claimed. Wilson was ready to implement his principles of peace. After they had seen all of the women's involvement in supporting the war efforts, I think this is what pushed finally the Senate to pass the vote, and it did in 1919. Next, it needed to be ratified. So the letters and the telegrams and the calls went out to get state legislators to pass it. By 1920, they had 35 states and needed one more. Tennessee would be the 36th. Several votes came up as a tie, and then it passed in the House by one vote cast by Harry Byrne, who voted yay. He'd actually changed his vote, apparently after reading a letter his mother wrote him. Hurrah, and vote for suffrage, and don't keep them in doubt, and don't forget to be a good boy. Yay for mothers. The meeting was packed with suffragists who were wearing yellow jonquils, but also others wearing anti-suffrage red roses. Tennessee ratified the amendment, and the Constitution was changed to guarantee that women would no longer be denied the right to vote. On August 26th, the amendment was formally adopted into the Constitution by proclamation of Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby. This next song I put here because it has to do with the power of a mother. And it was also one of the most popular besides Ethel Smith's March of the Women. This particular piece of sheet music reinforced a major argument of suffragist sympathizers. In responding to critics who contended that women lacked the inherent capability to vote in a responsible manner, they pointed out that men gave over the chore of raising children to their wives. If women were so incapable that they could not cast a vote properly, then what were men doing in allowing them to bring up their children? And this cover shows actually like an attractive young mother instead of some of the other images that were used in the anti-suffrage music. Here's "She's good enough to be your baby's mother, and she's good enough to vote with you."
No man is greater than his mother. No man is half so good. No man is better than the wife he loves. Her love will guide him, whatever betide him. She's good enough to love you and adore you. She's good enough to bear your troubles for you. And if your tears were falling today, nobody else would kiss them away. She's good enough to warm your heart with kisses when you are lonesome and blue. She's good enough to be your baby's mother, and she's good enough to vote with you. Men plunge the world in war and sadness. she's good enough to bear your troubles for you. And if your tears were falling today, nobody else would kiss them away. She's good enough to warm your heart with kisses when you are lonesome and blue. She's good enough to be your baby's mother, and she's good enough to vote with you.
Thank you. Alice Paul hung the suffrage flag on the balcony after she sewed the 36th star on it. There was no signing ceremony, no photographer, and no suffrage leader present when Colby signed the 19th Amendment into the Constitution as law. The women were excluded. I want to say in closing that the struggle for women's rights was a long battle of slow gains and occasional losses driven by activism at all levels of society. And the 19th Amendment did leave large parts of the population unprotected, like women of color, until discriminatory efforts became illegal with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The songs written about the struggle can be used to see the thinking of the time, the arguments against, and the motivation of the women and the men who fought for suffrage. It played a key role in almost every meeting, gathering, protest, rally, funerals, jail time, and celebration. This one song is to the tune of Auld Lang Syne, and it's called Keep Woman in Her Sphere. And I feel like women had to work so hard to change men's minds. It took 72 years, but eventually they got it. And this is why. That's better. I have a neighbor, one of those, not very hard to find, who know it all without debate and never change their mind. I asked him, what of women's rights? He said in tones severe, my mind on that is all made up. Keep woman in her sphere. I saw a man in tattered garb forth from the grog shop come. He squandered all his cash for drink and starved his wife at home. I asked him, should not women vote? He answered with a sneer, I've taught my wife to know her place. Keep woman in her sphere. I met an earnest, thoughtful man not many days ago, who pondered deep all human law, the honest truth to know. I asked him, what of woman's cause? The answer came sincere. Her rights are just the same as mine. Let woman choose her sphere. I want to thank you all for having me today. Thank you for this time to share in women's history and the struggle that they went through over 72 years and over 100 years ago to secure the right to vote. I want to thank all of the suffragists for everything that they did so that we can stand on their shoulders and have liberty. I hope you'll go singing some of these songs, or at least learn a little bit more about about women's rights. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Deborah, I'd like to thank you for an outstanding
Thank you.
program.
Thank
We
you.
have time for just maybe a couple of questions, and then
Yeah.
Deborah can be available to talk to you if you've got a question after that. I ask you, if you do have a question, please raise your hand, and I can hand you the mic so we can capture the question on our video. So, there's one over here.
Okay. The first woman to vote for her son happened to have been Mrs. Roosevelt, as in Franklin's mother.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it is, right? To be able to finally do that.
Any other question? Nope.
He's got a question.
Back that way again.
Was there any debate at the original constitutional conventions about women and vote?
Oh, I mean, other than like Abigail Adams saying, don't forget the women in a letter to, John Adams, but I don't think it was ever considered, actually.
As I said, Deborah can be available for a few minutes here, but we need to
Yeah.
conclude our program for today. And on behalf of the York County Historical Committee, I'd like to thank everybody for coming and hope you enjoyed it. It looks apparently everybody did. Before I let you escape out the door there, I'd like to make a couple of quick announcements. One is we'd like to invite you to visit the York County Historical Museum, which is located in the basement of this building. Unfortunately, it's not open today, but you need to check the hours and visit the what is one of Yorktown's or York County's hidden gems, the museum. Also, I'd like to advise you that fact books on the history of York County and African American history in York County are available for sale this afternoon. They're located just outside the room here if you want to take a look at those and possibly purchase some. This concludes our lecture series for the spring. However, we do have an event coming up on April the 16th, Meet the Author. Ms. Maria Hepner will conduct a book signing and sales for her book about the history of the Yorktown Victory Monument. Flyers advertising that event are also on in the lobby outside here. If you're not on our email list for upcoming lecture events coming up in the fall series, but would you like to be added? There are little slips of paper outside the door here. You can put your email address on it and drop it in the box, and we'll add you to the mailing list. Again, thank you very much for coming, and hope you enjoyed it.